Hello and welcome to Getting Started in DevOps, a webinar about the keys to making it easier, an extract from my book, The DevOps Overture. I'm Shawn Doyle, and I'll be today's first presenter. I've a little bit about myself. My background is in software development. I've been doing it since the mid to late 80s, starting out in the United States Army. After the Army, I became a sysadmin at a company outside of Boston, Massachusetts, where I quickly became the de facto lead on many software development tools. From there, I spun that into a career at a couple different companies. And in the late 90s, I found myself at Ericsson Wireless. And from there, I left and found my own company called ReleaseTEAM. This is our 21st year in business. So who is ReleaseTEAM? So we were founded in 1999. We specialize in software CM and then build automation, which then turned into CI and then added in CD. And that all became kind of a key component of DevOps. So we're a professional service organization. We work strongly in the I guess what they're calling the SLED area, which is state, local, government, and defense. Myself, I do a lot of Department of Defense contracts. While I'm the founder and CEO, I do a lot of the consulting myself. Let's see, another thing to hit on is, yes, we do have security clearances if anyone was asking. I'm not sure anyone was. Some mandatory marketing slides. I was strung on by the marketing department to add these. So here are some of our clients. And some real quick blurbs from some recent clients. So why did I write a book? I wonder that myself sometimes. It's something I kind of always wanted to do, but never really had the gumption to go do it. A couple of years back, I was doing a consulting job helping a large bank up in Canada move a lot of their legacy tools, those tools that I wasn't going to name earlier, to more modern tools, things like GitLab and some Atlassian tools. When one of the system admins that I wasn't working directly with approached me, and he was nervous. He asked most of these questions that are on the slide here. I ended up taking him out to dinner that night, and we talked about his future career options, and what the future would hold for him now that his company is no longer doing what he had been doing there for almost 20 years. So after that, I felt I had enough material for a book. And this wasn't the first nor last time people approached me to ask these questions that they were nervous about, that they've been doing iterative development or even waterfall for 20 plus years, and now everything's changing and they don't understand. So that's why I wrote the book. The typical consultant answer for anything is it depends, and it does depend on a lot of things. The whole point of the book is more geared towards the individual contributor, the software developer, the CM person, the QA engineer, and where do they fit in the DevOps culture. Quick framing on DevOps. There is no single definition of DevOps. If anyone tells you there is, then they're wrong. Go ahead and Google it. There's plenty of great definitions by some great speakers out there, and they're all a little different. They all seem to narrow in on people, process, and tools, though. The definition that I like to use is it's a set of technical and cultural practices that shorten the lead time between concept and completed project. Anything that shortens that amount of time is DevOps. Historically, it came from let's remove all the the gates between the development environment and the ops environment. But not every software organization has a ops environment. Most have a dev environment, but not all of them have an ops environment. So that's why I like my definition a little better, but of course it's also my definition, so that's why I like it better. But it's all about competitive advantages. You want to be more competitive in your market, regardless if it's, how many times can we churn the version of Netflix versus how can we be more attractive to government proposals? So they pick our company instead of, the other company. And then doing all the things for DevOps equals success. And I really like to reference the DORA report. If you're not familiar with that, definitely Google DORA. And it's Nicole Forsgren. She puts that on every year. She's got a team that she works with, but it basically narrows you into what all the things are for DevOps success. So for this webinar today, I'm going to talk about 3 key things from my book. There's multiple. There's a lot more keys. These are ones I felt that I had a semi-interesting story to talk about, and to make the webinar more useful. There's a lot more in the book, but I don't want to just come off like we're plugging the book. So the first one is having a plan, avoiding a us versus them, or breaking down the silos, and creating a positive learning environment, or what I call here a safe and constructive work environment. So planning DevOps, you want to start with your goals. You want to understand that you have goals and understand what they are. And from those goals, you want to define what your success criteria is. So this kind of goes back. I've got a favorite company, and you're all from my favorite company, but this company in particular, about 4 years ago, gutted their building. Used to have a bunch of cubes, and they're set up 4 people to a cube, and it was a huge development cube farm. And they decided that, hey, they want to do DevOps. But their plan pretty much was limited to furniture rearrangement. So they gutted 2 or 3 floors of their building, and they set all these desks out that, they're standing desks, they went up and down. They implemented nothing on desktops except for your keyboard and monitor. There's no walls in there. It's all one big open space. And then they threw the flag down, they stuck it in the ground, said, we're DevOps. But they didn't change any of their policies. They didn't really focus on any of the people, and they didn't change any tools. So they didn't really have a plan. So it's important to really have a plan on all 3 aspects of the main core of DevOps. And then us versus them. So this is a key thing I go over a lot in the book. But you want to seek these things out at the beginning of your DevOps journey, and make sure you get rid of as many as possible, or limit them. Way back in my early career in the 90s, I was working on a project that the first iteration of the project, which lasted about a year, was all done in-house. When they started working on version 2, they outsourced about a quarter of the project to a company out in California. Almost immediately, us versus them dynamic was created. Anything that came from California was suspect. Anytime the Massachusetts site was late on something, well, it was California's fault. Anytime California actually did make a mistake or delivered something of lesser quality, it was because Massachusetts didn't tell them, to give them the right information, the right requirements, and all that. The project would have been fine if that us versus them dynamic was never created in the first place. But it's not always just a geological divide that causes this. Sometimes it's the CM department versus development department. Development feels CM is being too restrictive. The CM department feels development's ignoring them. And then classically dev versus ops. The ops department wants to make sure everything is solid and reliable as possible, and dev just wants to get their changes in there as quickly as possible. So there's a lot of dynamics, but you want to make sure that you don't have these ivory towers that don't talk to each other, and you want to make sure you don't get stuck in this us versus them mentality. And then probably the most important of all is you want to create a software development environment that all your team members want to be a part of. They want to wake up in the morning and log in and be in this environment. You don't want any jerks. You want to practice no blame. You know, for a project I was on just recently, we had this one person on the project that she was great, but nothing could get put into production unless she okayed it. And then she would go and be very, she felt she was being, what's the word I'm thinking of? Constructive feedback is what she thought that she was giving the team, but the entire team felt berated by all the reviews. And it would just take a little bit of time for her to step back, not be the jerk in the room, but still give constructive feedback to make this a good environment to work for. So you basically, the similar customer that I had, and this was very common, and in fact not too long ago, was the rubber chicken. And I used to be a big fan of the rubber chicken. So if you're not familiar with the rubber chicken, it was it was a symbol that you would give to somebody who broke the build. And if you walked into someone's cube and they had the rubber chicken hanging up at the entryway, you knew that they were the last person to break the build. And that rubber chicken would get shared to the next person who broke the build. And you really didn't want to have the rubber chicken in your cube. And so while that was more managing by embarrassment, it's not really building a constructive and safe work environment. It's really, you really want to learn from your mistakes. You want to allow mistakes to happen. You want to allow you want people to experiment. So you really want to build that culture up. And if you're not the manager, if you're just a team member, don't be the jerk in the group. If you look around and everyone seems to be getting along, and maybe you're being the jerk. So, a certain amount of cowboyism is okay in work environments, but ultimately you don't want to be the one guy that, like from the Phoenix Project, Brent, that basically was had to be involved in everything. But you want to build up the other team members and that. And remember, it's not just about furniture arrangements. Just because you're in a open space, and these days everyone's working from home, so it's not much open anymore, doesn't necessarily mean that you're DevOps. So in summary, the three ones I decided to focus on this webinar was, make sure you have a plan. Don't just think you have a plan and go for it. But when you do have a real plan with goals and actually a list of definitions of done, expect that you're going to have to revise it and improve on it and iterate through that. You don't just have one plan to go into DevOps and then you're done. You have a plan to start the DevOps journey and then continuously improve on that. You want to find silos and break them down. And I kind of missed this when I was going over the silos, but silos are also, not only are they groups that don't talk to each other, but they sometimes can be boards. You have your change control board that might be, could use with trimming back some. Make sure that it's only important things that you're throwing through boards. So it's basically anything that gates process. Certain gates are very important, and you need to have them in there, but they need to be evaluated often and basically recertified that they're actually truly useful and they're not just hindering the process. Over time, a lot of, especially what I see in DoD, the boards have been there for 10, 20 years on a long lasting project, and they might not make sense anymore. And then you want to build the safe and constructive work environment. You want to have a company where people want to work there, and you're not losing people through attrition because they're just fed up with the jerks. So. And so ReleaseTEAM is a GitLab partner. We've been GitLab partner for quite a few years. I believe GitLab was probably about 25 people when ReleaseTEAM started the GitLab partnership. We provide professional services around GitLab, and we also are a reseller of GitLab and GitLab products. I guess I have to plug security clearances again. Our professional services are a lot of them are geared towards the government area, and we do have high-level security clearances to help out your project. And I think that's it. And I'd like to hand it over to Joe.
Well, thank you, Shawn. I appreciate it. I will be sharing my screen here in just a moment. Okay, so Shawn, can you see my screen okay?
I'm still seeing mine. Oh, no, yes, I can see it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Shawn. So hi, everyone. I'm Joseph Valeriano, a solutions architect with the GitLab public sector team. And so today's session is going to be about getting started in DevOps, specifically with GitLab. The goal of this presentation is to present the attendees with a potential roadmap for implementing DevOps in your organization. So with considerations around people, process, and tools, as Shawn mentioned, while avoiding some of the pitfalls that kind of happen in some of the use cases that I've seen with government agencies, whether federal or state and local, kind of that DevOps theater, if you, so to speak, where you say DevOps and people have an idea in mind, but it's really just kind of changing the status quo and relabeling it. So we want to avoid that. And with the end result being, you have a flexible plan for implementing DevOps in a very intelligent way, but that also allows you to adapt DevOps to your organization and to come up with a roadmap of sorts that allows you to navigate some of the challenges that could happen along the way. So as I mentioned, my name's Joseph Valeriano. Similar to Shawn, I have an Army background. I was an Army intelligence analyst for 13 years in the military, and I've heard all the jokes about the oxymoron, so hopefully this presentation shows you that maybe some of those aren't true. I also have a history in Agile development, whether that's at the project or program level, and I have a master's in systems engineering. So all that to say that my experience kind of runs the gamut of Agile and traditional waterfall development. And maybe I have an experience that's similar to how some of you in the audience have. And so my first experience with Agile development, which led to DevOps practices, was a voluntold assignment that I had 5-6 years ago. And my program manager at the time said, hey, we need to be a little bit more competitive in winning some contracts. And the new buzzword out there is Agile. Would you consider becoming an Agile product owner for a couple of these teams? The problem is I didn't know anything about Agile. All of my experience had been waterfall to that point. And so I told my program manager, well, let me think about it over the weekend, I'll get back to you. Well, Monday morning when I show up to the office, he introduced everyone, or me to everyone, as the new product owner for a couple of his efforts, and off we went. So no training, I barely knew how to spell Agile. And so I learned a lot of lessons through some things not to do, which I guess may be some of the best teaching experience, though some of the most frustrating. So for you who are in the audience that are new to DevOps, new to Agile, and maybe it's something that's being forced on you, I can definitely understand and empathize. And hopefully some of the lessons learned that I'll share with stories during this presentation will either resonate or help you avoid some of the things that I experienced as a new product owner, and then eventually over time as an experienced leader in that realm. So DevOps, as Shawn mentioned, can be defined in many different ways. And it's often defined by what problems are you trying to solve? Is it because there's a lack of communications amongst a bunch of different tools? Is your team releasing software with high defect rates? Are there security vulnerabilities in the code that maybe should have been found before? Or hopefully not all of the above at the exact same time. With this understanding, government agencies, federal, state, local, and even education departments are trying to embrace the principles of developing software faster, decreasing defect rates, and really shifting left the security of the applications you're trying to develop. And so government agencies are embracing this concept of, hey, the old way or maybe the traditional way of developing code or some other file system, it's just not working in the way that it used to, or at least in many of the examples. And so what happens is, as I talked about my experience of becoming a product owner in name to begin with, well, maybe that's how your DevOps environment started. It's a collection of tools that were already in place, a spider web of sorts, that people just said, okay, we have these tools already, let's tie them together and say we're DevOps. The problem with this is, while each of these tools might be really good in their own right at some particular feature or small set of features, is each of the tools is updated asynchronously, they're procured asynchronously, and so what happens is the procurement cycles cost more, they take longer, and if you're updating your software asynchronously, is maybe a plugin breaks that makes this whole chain fall apart. And as Shawn mentioned, as data silos are a really bad thing to have, each of these items has their own data structures. So you can integrate data to it a certain extent, but it's all going to fall apart over time. And heaven forbid you try to train an organization on all of these tools. It's going to be expensive, require specialized skill sets, and be almost impossible to do. And as a customer or a non-technical person, if I try to understand what's going on by digging into a Jenkins pipeline, I'm going to have no idea what's going on. And so we see through the metrics here that for organizations that are embracing DevOps or renaming themselves to a DevOps organization, with that disconnected tool chain or spider web, there's a lot of waste and a lot of disappointment. And so where GitLab comes into play is, if you see here along the top, this is the software development lifecycle, or SDLC, represented serially through different phases of that lifecycle. At the top here, we have GitLab. And what GitLab aims to do is to provide features for every single phase of the lifecycle, all in a single application. So no plugins necessary, no integrations necessary, one tool, one procurement process, one environment to read data and train individuals in. Now, underneath GitLab in each of these phases, you have some of the most common competitors in each of these areas. This list is by no means comprehensive, but it's just meant to capture some of the key players in each of these phases. Some span more than one environment, many don't. But what GitLab provides in the whole life cycle, we also embrace as an open architecture. So if there's a tool in here that you see that's just a requirement for your contracts, or it's been so heavily invested and it's not going anywhere soon, GitLab wants to allow you to embrace DevOps through flexibility. So we'll give you the option of performing every feature in one tool. But for those tools that are just a requirement that you have to have, we're open enough that we can integrate and consume and pass data between those systems. So really giving you the flexibility to meet you at where you're at now, but also give the ability to later on maybe evolve away from that, decrease the number of tools procured, the integration points that maybe could break over time, giving you the ability to adapt and overcome for many years down the road. And so what looks like a spider web or a spaghetti bowl of all these different tools talking together, eventually we can give you that real-time compliance, that seamless collaboration in a single tool where all the data speaks the same language. So what we would like to do is get you away from just that development or that traditional development cycle where maybe someone codes, a code according to a requirement that someone else developed. Then they pass that over to the wall to a testing team, who then passes that over a wall to a security team, who then passes that over to maybe a larger system of systems. If we can bring that process to the lowest level possible, maybe as the developer's coding and makes a commit to their code, maybe we can bring that testing and that security scans to the lowest level possible so we can find those vulnerabilities or those errors while the developer's still in the code, and they can make the changes much more efficiently and much more cost effective than the traditional model. Oops, I went too fast there. So the idea with GitLab is getting out of the silos and then allowing an easy to understand environment for people who are new to DevOps. Let's all speak in the same language, right? If I have that spider web of tools where different coding structures or different data structures, or different environments, how do we map that all together? What we want is an apples to apples comparison of data, not someone's best guess of what the data means. Now, when I talk about my role as a product owner in the past, one of the lessons learned is I had multiple teams developing in different environments, but also managing the requirements of code in different tools. As a product owner, having to marry this data for my weekly project or program manager's meeting, what I would have to do is export that data from each of those tools, put it into a spreadsheet, create a pivot table, copy that pivot table and put it into a PowerPoint because that's what my program manager wanted. Oh, and then because my end user was a kernel on the East Coast, I had to write about all of that data in a Word document. Heaven forbid someone checked in code on a Friday afternoon, or a test broke, or some environment just collapsed on us. All of that data that I had spent maybe a few hours each Friday compiling was outdated. It was no longer representative of the truth. If we can get you in a single data model that's real time, it allows for transparency so that my program manager and stakeholders could have visualized that data for themselves. It was reliable. It was going to have the same story and the same interface every single time. It wasn't manipulated in any way to kind of make the data look better than it was or worse than it was, right? Because the one problem that we had when exporting data and going around the program manager's table every Monday morning was that every project was on time until they weren't, because you weren't dealing with a real-time roadmap. It's like driving down the street with a map that's pointing in reverse. So you don't know what's ahead of you. All you can tell is what happened in the past. With GitLab being in a single system, we can actually aggregate data across many different projects and repositories so that as an organization, we know where we're at, where we're heading, and we have a reliable confidence in that the data is telling the actual story of what's happened and what's coming down the road. And with DevOps and the need to break down silos, to be safe and secure in your environment, is GitLab opens its code base to the whole entire environment. So end users, contributors in the open source environment, they can see the GitLab's code and add to it. But what this also does is it exposes our vulnerabilities. We actually have bug bounty programs that we pay very handsomely to open source contributors or other people, vendors out there who can find code or vulnerable code in our base and make fixes. Because if this was developed in a closed source environment where you didn't know what was going on, those vulnerabilities might be hidden from you, but then they also might be open for people who have nefarious intentions to expose. We don't want that. We want to be open, continuously innovating, getting rid of those bugs, and making this data available for everyone. And if you can see here in this quadrant, we've actually done a very good job at that. For organizations that are adopting a new DevOps framework, or who are maybe relabeling their current spiderweb or daisy chain of tools together, something to be really considered about is not painting yourself into a technological corner down the road. If you are locked into a certain vendor, you're also locked into their tooling. Hopefully they're developing in an intelligent way down the road. And what if technology changes down the road? I mean, we think 20 years ago, pre-smartphone days, how much have things changed over those 20 years? If you had been locked into a vendor, you would have been maybe late to the game, a laggard in technological adoption. GitLab doesn't want that. With our open architecture, with our infrastructure is agnosticism, is we allow you to adapt to technology as it changes, so that down the road, if maybe you have an organizational objective to migrate to the cloud, we can do that. Not just a single infrastructure, but to all of the key players out there in the environment. If certain security restrictions require you to be on-premise and hosted in your own environment, we support that as well. Because technology changes, and as we see in the world today, environments change, situations change, and you need a plan to adapt, not be locked into a certain technological infrastructure that maybe doesn't suit your needs next year or even 5 years down the road. With GitLab being that single application, we've talked about flexibility, openness, transparency, data consistency, and you don't get that with a daisy chain of tools, especially when it's convoluted like the spider web diagram I showed a few slides back. The Agile Manifesto, one of the tenets is responding to change over following a plan. So when you get started with GitLab, most of our customers start with source control management and continuous integration, because those are things you're already kind of doing now, but maybe there's some low-hanging fruit that we can take care of it by just moving into a single application and managing those with the best of breed tool set within GitLab. If down the road you decide, hey, we want to involve security, maybe shift that left, continuous deployment so that we're reaping the benefits of deploying our applications constantly, keeping our application up to date and secure. If you're in a siloed tool chain, that just adopting those features over time means adding on more tools, procuring more cycles of applications and training. It takes time and it's not easy, but if you're in GitLab, all it means is using a new feature set that's already available to you. It just means tying into a new environment and connecting that to your repository or project. No extra tool needed, no procurement, no extra training. It's really quite easy and flexible to adapt to meet you where you're at versus where you want to go, because your plans might change, and they often do, right? I think I probably misquoting, so please forgive me, but it was Muhammad Ali that said, everyone has a plan until they get hit in the mouth, or maybe that was someone else, I'm sorry. Exactly, right? Everyone has a plan about how DevOps is going to work until they start training the current employees, until they start adapting to the next contract adjustment. So let's be flexible here. Now, when I ask my customers, what does your development flow look like? Does it look like an assembly line? Everything's in a neat serial order. Is it a boomerang where the code goes out and comes back because of bugs or defects? Does it look like a bowl of spaghetti where I don't know where the data comes from and I don't know where it goes? I just have my head down, do my job, and magically the code goes somewhere else. And hopefully no one's asking the question, what is a development flow? At GitLab, we give you best of breed processes baked right into our tools. And this adheres to the agile tenet of working software over comprehensive documentation. So documentation is important, but what we really want is a process that allows you to get that working software out according to your processes and needs. So it begins by just the basic ability within the Git to create an issue and create a branch. And what, in the old way of doing things, we would type or code our software according to an outdated requirements document and throw it over the fence and hopefully it works. Maybe 6 months down the road, we get some security scan that says, hey, we introduced a vulnerability, or a test report that says we didn't do exactly what we were supposed to. And if that coder's still around, hopefully they remember where that code's at. But what often happened is that developer had been moved on to another project, and we need to figure out what they meant by reading their comments or anything in the code. And hopefully we can fix that. GitLab gets out of that to get you working software through truncating that time frame to test your code, to scan it for security vulnerabilities right at this commit level where you see the start. And to demonstrate that code in real time through such concepts as review applications, where we can show people what's changed in the code through an actual working instance of the code before it goes into production. An example of this might be if you're working with a child welfare services application, which child welfare worker is going to know it by looking at the code what the software is going to look like? But if we can show them an environment, say, hey, this is what changes, this is the color of the UI and the buttons, they might be able to say, hey, that blue button won't look very, or it won't be very visible in a nighttime environment when I'm handling a case at 2, 3 in the morning. Wouldn't you want to know that now versus getting that code out to production and then affecting the processing of a child welfare case just because we weren't able to show that early and often? So this is the real world implications of having this best of breed flow built right into GitLab. And if you can conceptually think of that spider web of tools that we talked about earlier, in most environments now, each of these different circles is represented by a different tool. In GitLab, it's all GitLab at the commit level before these changes make it to production. Now, with just a few more slides, I just want to show you a couple of examples of what seamless DevOps traceability looks like. And so I harp on requirements because I have a lot of scars in that issue, being a systems engineer by trade in the past and a product owner receiving outdated documents. But for federal agencies and state agencies of all sorts, is we still have to plan, right? We still have to come up with some notion of a way forward. We don't want to be disconnected from what the development teams are doing, hoping they're doing good things. So in GitLab, we're going to give you the ability to plan at different levels of duration. So maybe a year time frame or 6 months or even sprints, right? And so it's that ability to plan at a level that matches your organizational needs, and then to decompose that work according to the different teams' skill sets. So you might have a database team or a marketing team, or even human resources for hiring individuals. If we know there's a large scale effort underway in our organization, we need to plan accordingly, include everyone, so we have the right people hired when we need to start a certain project. Oops. We also have context, right? One of the problems that developers have is, hey, I got this requirement. Where did it come from? Who do I talk to? If it's not written well, hopefully I'm developing to the plan accordingly. GitLab's going to give you this visibility, but this is also through GitLab's traceability amongst different organizations and projects within your group, is we're going to be able to roll this data up, not just by visualizing where the work came from, but at the top level, I can actually visualize across all those different efforts where the effort is at any given time. And embedding security scans into a developer's changes. When I talked about the best of industry flow that I showed just a few slides ago, this is what it actually looks like. We can actually run many different jobs. So whether it's a security scan or compiling code or whatever it is, we can do these as efficiently as possible. Oftentimes, as you see in this test phase, running many different processes in parallel. When you think of the old waterfall way of doing things, everything was serial. So if there was a problem, maybe 4 or 5 jobs down the road, you'd have to come back to the very beginning and start over again. Now, if something's, maybe the license management fails in this particular job, those other jobs can still run, and then we can just address things as efficiently and in real time as possible. GitLab, through its merge request and other dashboards within the platform, we give you like a car dashboard type view. So in your car dashboard, you have your gas system, you have your engine, you have oil levels, you have tire sensors. All these are subsystems within the actual car that perform very specific functions. Within GitLab, we're going to give you that car dashboard type view so that I can see security scans, license management. I can even go into the code and see what's changed, all from a single environment. You don't have to go digging around a spider web or a hornet's nest of tools to figure out what's going on, because oftentimes you need a very specialized skill set to understand what exactly changed. If I'm a business user or a non-technical person, I know that green means pass, red means fail, and yellow means there's concerns. I can see what new vulnerabilities mean. This means something to me. Now we can have intelligent conversations, or maybe a common data set conversation where we're comparing apples to apples and able to plan or adjust accordingly. And one of my last stories here is about developer friendliness. Getting started in DevOps needs to be safe. It needs to be, hey, we're helping you find vulnerabilities, because no one comes to work saying, hey, I want to introduce bugs and vulnerabilities into my code. But it's done accidentally, because many times those scans and tests aren't done until much later in our software development lifecycle. But by making that dashboard view as a developer, I can find out which vulnerabilities existed. I can click on those and remediate them in a really easy kind of contextual environment. So let's work while we're in the code, while we still have a mindset around what change we just made, so that we are able to be more effective, versus 3 months down the road trying to remember what changes we made. Agile development is all about empowering individuals. If I have a vulnerability, or if I need to have a conversation with our security personnel, we can drill into what the actual vulnerability was. We create issues to fix that bug right away, or that vulnerability, or we can dismiss it if it's just a known low priority vulnerability when we have a lot of other things that are more important. But at least we can have those conversations, and we're allowing those conversations to happen at the right levels. And what happens is we get real-time metrics where the organization can see, how are we going according to our plan? What changes were made? Who's participated? Right? When someone's auditing your software or your organization, many times we're trying to piece together this information. GitLab's going to keep this ready for you at all times in real time. No more pivot tables, PowerPoint, and Word documents like I used to have to do. And the last slide here is, when you have a safe environment with no data silos, it's user-friendly so that people actually want to update data in real time, you get an actionable roadmap. Because as I mentioned, everyone around the table is on time until they're not. But if I can actually see that we're 10% complete with 1 week left in our timeline, we can have that hard conversation and say, what can I do for you to help? How realistic is that we have 90% of the work left to finish in 1 week? So let's no longer spend Saturdays, drinking Mountain Dew and eating pizza, trying to get software out the door by our Monday deadline. I only say that because I've done that more times than I can appreciate. So you get the right data at the right level at the right time. So thank you, everyone, for letting me speak with you about getting started in DevOps and GitLab. Hopefully you are able to conceptualize that roadmap of sorts, meeting you where you're at, but giving the flexibility to grow while breaking down data silos, while making it easy to train and to read data across the organization, versus each team having its own specialized tools, specialized data, and then trying to marry that data at a certain level. So I will stop talking, and I will open up the floor to questions.
Okay, we do have a few questions. Let's see, we have for Shawn. Oh, it's a long one. I read your book and I loved it. I'd never heard of DevOps before 2 months ago, and it really helped me to understand. In the book, and also here today, you endorse a no-blame culture. I've worked in local government for many years. Finger pointing and laying blame are the norm, both by the government employees and management and by the public. What advice do you have for starting a no blame culture in such a hostile environment?
Well, that is a long question. So I'll go back to my usual answer is it depends. And it depends on what your role is in that organization. If you're a individual contributor, it's kind of trying to manage that upwards. Don't practice blame yourself and hope that it at the lowest level, hope it doesn't, hope it does catch on, not blaming people, but then managing up and explaining the reasons why blaming everybody is not the most efficient way to run a team, or not necessarily just efficient, but how does the manager feel when he gets blamed for stuff? I'm sure all managers in that type of environment would get blamed for a lot of stuff. Explain how that really nips learning in the butt. You basically, you're not going to be able to learn from mistakes if everyone is so scared of making a change that might have negative effects, that they're never going to do that. That just, not only does it make people uncomfortable and you're not learning in that environment, you're also slowing the entire process down. If you're not, if you're so nervous to jump in and make a change, you're not going to go out and make that change. You're going to procrastinate. You're going to delay it. You might get more and more gates thrown up every time there's a change. Well, let's get to the root cause of that, and let's put some constraints in so that exact problem will never happen again. So yeah, it's not there's no perfect answer. There's no silver bullet, but that's basically the ways to go about it. Now, if you're an upper management, it's easier to start mandating a no blame culture. But if you're if you're a developer or a junior person on the team, it's a little bit harder, but it all starts with you.
All right, good stuff. Hopefully that answers the question. All right, we have one for Joseph. When relating to issues, what are epics? Is it important that we incorporate security into our DevOps when we are just beginning? And how does GitLab compare to GitHub?
All right, thank you. So those are good questions. So the first question about epics in Agile terminology are going to be anything larger than like say a sprint. So a sprint being a couple weeks in time box. It can be a quarter, it can be a month, it can be 6 months. It's just a longer way to plan, but without planning so far in advance that the plan becomes outdated. Now, the second part of that question is, how important is it to incorporate security when beginning DevOps? I would say it's very important because, as I mentioned with the Agile Manifesto, one of the key tenets is working software over documentation. And the key words being working software. Now, not everyone can incorporate security in the beginning, but with GitLab we're going to give you that option. We're going to scan your software for you based on tools that we found in open source tools that allow you to scan based on the language you're using, whether you're using containers. So it's actually really easy to start in the beginning. We make it kind of like that easy button, because if we're developing software but not incorporating security, it might be working software, so to speak, but is working software considered working if it's vulnerable? I mean, so it depends on your organization's appetite for risk. And I think with GitLab's easy button of security, it really is easy to start straight from out of the box. Now, the third part, how do we compare to GitLab or to GitHub? GitHub is a source control tool owned by Microsoft. And so while we both share the Git part of our names for that source control aspect, GitHub needs to be extended through other tools in order to complete the software development lifecycle. GitLab does the source control aspect, but many more without the need for other tools. So it's a single application for the whole lifecycle. Hopefully that answers your question.
All right, we have another one for you. if I want to use a tool instead of what is offered by GitLab, can I change? Ergo, I am using GitLab and use Chef, but after a few months, I want to use Ansible. Can I?
So great question. And the answer is yes. When I talked about that open architecture of GitLab, we aim to make it easy to do everything in GitLab. But as we realize, there are some tools that people just really like or need to use, and that's okay. And so being open, you can tie to Chef. And then if, say, a contract requirement says you use Ansible down the road or Ansible in addition to Chef, you can definitely integrate those tools into GitLab, and we can bring that information into that kind of car dashboard view that I showed you earlier. So it is definitely possible, and we want to be as open and flexible for you to get the job done in the most efficient way possible. Hopefully that answers your question.
All right. Are there any other questions? Heather, Victor, do you guys have anybody directly chatting to you? Questions? Okay, I guess that's not. All right, well, I guess that wraps things up. We thank you for attending. There'll be copies of the recording, and the PowerPoint slides will be made available, be emailed to all the attendees later today. Thank you for attending, and stay safe.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, and thank you.